Okay, I think we'll get started. We have a few really good panels set up for today, and thank you to our clerk for getting that going. Welcome to meeting number 44 of the Standing Committee on Science and Research. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the House Order of June 23rd, 2022. Members are attending in person, and we do have a witness in the second hour that will be on Zoom. I'd like to make a few comments for the benefits of the witnesses and the members. Please wait until I recognize you by name before speaking, and for those participating on video conference, well, that doesn't exactly apply right now, but we'll do a reminder in the second hour. A reminder also that pursuant to Standing Order 10831 and the motion adopted by the committee on Tuesday, February 14th, 2023, the committee is commencing its study on the Government of Canada's graduate scholarship and postdoctoral fellowship programs. So I welcome our guests. We have from the Department of Industry, Nipun Vats, the ADM of Science and Research Sector. We have from the National Research Council of Canada, Shannon Quinn, the Secretary General. Welcome back. And Joel Martin, the Chief Science Officer. So each organization will have 5 minutes for your opening remarks, after which we'll proceed to our rounds of questions, and I'll signal you when we're getting close to time. So who would like to kick us off? Mr. Vats? Great, thank you.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, for the invitation, and I'm pleased to join this committee once again to testify on this important topic. Before I begin, I wish to acknowledge that I'm working on the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people. Comme vous l'avez mentionné, je suis sous-ministre adjoint du secteur des sciences.
As you mentioned, I'm ADM. In this role, I'm responsible for policy and programs related to federal funding of post-secondary research and for fostering connections between research and its downstream economic and societal benefits.
The ISED portfolio provides direct financial support to graduate students and postdoctoral fellows through scholarship and fellowship awards funded through the federal granting agencies. As you know, the Natural Science and Engineering Research Council, the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council, and in the health portfolio, we also have the Canadian Institutes of Health Research, all three of whom will be here the next hour. ISED recognizes the critical role of graduate students and postdoctoral trainees in producing the knowledge, discoveries, and innovations that help build a strong future for Canada and the world. The government is also cognizant of the central role that federal scholarships and fellowships play in nurturing and sustaining Canada's top talent through support for career progression and increased financial security and independence in terms of their academic pursuits. Les étudiants au cycle supérieur jouent.
Graduate students play a vital role in the research ecosystem, making considerable contributions to scientific publications and advancing knowledge while developing their skills and knowledge base. ISED recognizes that graduate students and trainees are facing financial challenges that can be a barrier to pursuing higher education, and that these financial pressures can also impact students' well-being.
A research environment that is supportive of Canada's top talent and promotes science in this country. We know that as other countries double down on their investments in science and research, Canada must continue to keep pace. Overall, since 2016, Canada has committed more than $16 billion to support the valuable contributions that scientists and researchers make to the health, well-being, and prosperity of all Canadians. This includes targeted investments in Budget 2019 to fund an additional 500 master's scholarships, as well as 167 more doctoral scholarships. In addition, parental leave coverage was extended from 6 to 12 months to help young researchers better balance work and family, and to not disadvantage early career researchers who wish to start a family. ISDE reconnaît aussi que
ISED also recognizes that a more equitable, diverse, and inclusive Canadian research enterprise is essential to creating innovative and impactful research. To this end, the government has invested in bursaries and scholarships for First Nations, Inuit, and Métis students through Inspire.
Increase opportunities for Black student researchers using the funds received in Budget 2022 for targeted scholarships and fellowships. Most recently, through Budget 2023, to support post-secondary students and make life more affordable, the government proposed $813 million starting in 23-24 to increase Canada student grants by 40%, providing up to $4,200 for full-time students. Budget 2023 further proposes to raise the interest-free Canada student loan limit from $210 to $300 per week of study and waive the requirement for mature students aged 22 or older to undergo credit screening in order to qualify for federal student grants and loans for the first time. This will allow up to 1,000 additional students to benefit from federal aid in the coming year. Dans le budget de 2023, le gouvernement a aussi
In addition, Budget 2023 also proposed $197.7 million in 2024-25 to the Student Work Placement Program to continue creating quality work-integrated learning opportunities for students through partnerships between employers and post-secondary institutions. This investment will support students in gaining the necessary skills, education, and real-life work experience to transition successfully into the workforce.
Forward, ISED will continue to work with the granting agencies and the research community, including graduate students and stakeholder organizations, to inform how we can improve the research environment for researchers now and in the future. The previous work that this committee has done, as well as the ongoing study, will be certainly valuable input, and I look forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now for National Research Council, Ms. Quinn.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président, de m'avoir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the invitation to speak with you today about the National Research Council of Canada. I'm Shannon Quinn, and I am the Secretary General for the NRC. I am joined by my colleague, Dr. Joel Martin, our Chief Science Officer and Chief Digital Research Officer.
Acknowledging that the research activities that the National Research Council undertakes take place all across Canada on the unceded, shared, current, and traditional territories of the First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people. We acknowledge and respect the people who are on these lands before us and the privilege that we have to do our work on them. The NRC is Canada's federal research and development organization, and we conduct our activities in 24 locations across 10 provinces. Our scientists, engineers, and business people work with universities, colleges, and Canadian industry in order to advance research and technology and to move technology from the lab to the marketplace. We serve a unique role in connecting the diverse parts of Canada's science ecosystem, and we use our research assets to respond to public policy priorities and create opportunities for Canadian businesses and Canadians as a whole. In 2021-22, NRC Labs worked with over 1,000 R&D clients, and through NRC IRAP, we worked with over 9,000 small and medium-sized enterprises. Today, the NRC is in a period of change, very exciting change. So as we speak, we're preparing to transition NRC IRAP over to the new Canadian Innovation Corporation to create even more opportunities for business innovation in Canada. At the same time, the NRC Labs are undertaking a significant capital modernization that will provide researchers across the entire Canadian research ecosystem with access to the kind of modern facilities that they need to do their work. This includes providing access to graduate and postdoctoral students. As a research institution, the NRC is a partner to industry and to academia. As an important part of our role in this ecosystem, we seek to provide opportunities for students and early career researchers. That said, I would like to emphasize that we are not a funder of external graduate opportunities in the same way that our colleagues in the granting councils are. Rather, the NRC works to provide students and early career researchers with important employment opportunities and experiences working in our labs with our facilities and alongside our expert researchers. In 2017, the NRC created a postdoctoral fellowship program to complement our early career research opportunities. And by 21-22, this provided valuable hands-on research training to 31 postdoctorate fellows. More broadly, in 2021-22, the NRC hired more than 400 students ranging from co-op to doctorate levels. Our goal is not to keep all of these researchers in-house, but rather to train them and send them out into the broader ecosystem so that they may contribute to the research that's happening in our industries and in academia. To illustrate this point, as one specific example, Canada's most recent Nobel laureate, Dr. Donna Strickland, was herself a student at the NRC in her early career. So she was a summer student and then subsequently a postdoctoral fellow at the NRC, and then she went on to an outstanding career in academia. Also of note, NRC IRAP has participated in the Youth Employment and Skill Strategy since its inception in 1997. YES has provided thousands of job opportunities throughout Canada across a wide range of sectors. This is good for the small and medium-sized enterprises, for the students, and for the Canadian innovation sector in general. En conclusion, et en tant que principal organisme.
To conclude, and as the government of Canada's largest research organization, the NRC is aware of its responsibility to continue the ongoing work of knowledge transfer from established to early career researchers. In doing so, we are nurturing the development of the highly qualified personnel needed for Canada's future success. Thank you for your time.
Questions.
Thank you very much. And now we'll go to our first round of questions, 6 minutes each, starting with Corey Tucker. Mr. Tucker, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to our witnesses. I'll start with Mr. Vats. It was proposed in the March 2023 report on the advisory panel on the Federal Research Support System that a Canadian Knowledge and Science Foundation, the CKSF, be created to complement, but not replace, the existing Tri-Council funders. What is your department's stance on this?
Well, thank you for the question. So I think the government is studying the recommendations of the report. I think there's a general sense that there could be more done in terms of driving mission-oriented research, in terms of having a more coordinated approach to how to engage with the research funders, how we engage internationally on science and research, and so a lot of the objectives of that recommendation, the Bouchard report, I think are certainly worth thinking through. But the government hasn't yet sort of decided on its approach to responding to the report. I think it has acknowledged that a lot of this is very valuable in terms of the directions that the report is putting forward.
One of the directions they put forward is that keeping STEM and the humanities united, with knowledge intended to be a large part of the representing the humanities students. Has there been any consideration actually of the merits of splitting them further apart instead of uniting them?
You mean as organizations, or in terms of well, I mean, one of the things that we've seen in terms of the way research has evolved over time is that there's been a greater appreciation of the synergies between different disciplines of research. So there, you see a lot of the more transformative projects that are put forward by researchers cutting across sciences, social sciences, humanities, health sciences. And so I think, the Bouchard report does sort of indicate that there is a kind of core focus that's needed on certain areas of research, but there also needs to be a way to bring all of those capabilities together to address the big challenges that we all face. So I don't know if the idea is to separate them more, but to appreciate what each of those bring to the table and then think about ways to integrate them.
Switching gears a little bit, talk about there's been long-term concerns in the States, and we our demographics aren't that much different. But there's been a great deal of discussion lately about how universities and colleges are going to be facing an enrollment crisis and the shifting demographics of both of our countries, and the strengthening economy as well might impact how many students we actually have. Does that seem likely to occur in Canada as well? And if so, how would you tailor your grant programs if the demographics did bear out that they would be shifting?
Well, you know, a lot of the universities do depend, particularly for graduate level and postdoctoral research, they depend on international students to a great extent. And they've added a lot of value to our research ecosystem. So I would expect that, you know, there would continue to be an effort to try and attract talent to universities, not only for the benefits of, you know, revenue raising and research at universities, but also as a means to bring talented people from around the world to Canada and hopefully have them stay and contribute to the economy. So I don't know if it would necessarily shift programming. You know, there may be a need to look at how to incentivize the top international talent to come to Canada, and there are certainly programs that do that today, and we'll likely have to continue exploring how to do that better as other countries are pursuing the same objective.
Does it also weigh in a little bit that we have a smaller pool of applicants requesting funding so that actual per applicant dollar amount could go up? So an added benefit is that we may have less students, which actually helps with inflation being out of control right now. Having less students with the same amount of money, there'd actually be more dollars per student.
I suppose, I mean, you'd have to look at the trends for the undergraduate student population, which is the largest kind of component of revenues for universities. If you're talking about scholarships and fellowships in particular, targeted at graduate and you know, graduate students and postdoctoral fellows, I think it's, you know, the numbers that we're talking about are not huge, like in terms of the overall student population. And I would expect that to the extent possible, universities would continue to try and attract top people to pursue that internationally. It's hard to say what
just
that would...
being aware, we got 1 minute, 53 seconds left on my clock. We're just switch gears a little bit to the NRC. According to I did a little bit of research on it. According to the CSIS website, the NRC headquarters was a prime espionage target during the Cold War. Is a foreign interference with students and professors still a concern in your eyes?
So, I mean, what I would say is that that scientific establishments in Canada, we know, are a target for because we do have advanced research. We have some of the leading research in some of the most sought-after domains, and the CNSC is no exception. So we are part of that ecosystem that we know has valuable information and is of interest to foreign entities. So we take that very, very seriously at the NRC. It's true from a physical security point of view. It's true from a cybersecurity point of view. And certainly our security screening is very, very important to us.
Okay.
So everyone...
Thanks. I'll have to cut you off there. I think we've got the main part of your thoughts, and thank you for the question, Mr. Tucker. Mr. Sousa, you're up next for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for your presentation. Certainly Canada, and you've referenced this in your comments, has been leading in research and in innovation. We have developed some world-class researchers, and we've performed, and it's been cutting edge. And we've been talking about in earlier discussions and other committee meetings in regards to the commercialization and trying to bring Canada to the forefront, but certainly that initial researching effort is critical. And we as a government recognize, that in order to cement that leadership in research and in science, we need to support the ecosystem, we need to modernize, we need to keep up the pace, and we need to face those challenges that are faced before us. And I appreciate your comments today in regards to, having commissioned a report in order to get third-party review to ensure that we cover the bases that are necessary to move forward on these initiatives, that we take and make informed decisions going forward. And so we have yet to make some of those decisions. But Mr. Vats, maybe I can start with you in regards to how has the federal funding for research evolved over the years? I mean, where are we now? Where do you anticipate we're going to be? But how has it evolved?
Thank you for the question. So it's been a very if you kind of go.
Merci pour la question. C'était une progression très intéressante. J'étais un étudiant au cycle supérieur dans les années 90.
Translation is flipped languages. If we could go back to English, that would be great.
Sorry, did
Thank
you
you,
want-
and I'll give you a few more seconds on that. If you can continue, please.
So there was a pretty significant investment at the end of the 90s in terms starting at the end of the 90s and continuing for quite a period of time to build up Canada's research capabilities in terms of research infrastructure, in terms of research funding, and you've seen the Canadian research ecosystem really evolve into something that's very well respected globally. Institutions have kind of built up their capabilities, and over time there's been an increase in funding in some larger programs as well to really say if you have strengths at the institutional level, can we bring those to a world-class level where you're really competing with the best in the world? There was recently an announcement of this Canada First Research Excellence Fund, about $1.3 or $1.4 billion, which is an example of a program that is meant to sort of take Canadian research or help Canadian research get to that next level globally. You're also seeing an evolution in terms of how institutions are working together, because I think there's a recognition that even though we've invested in this strength domestically, if you're going to compete as a small country globally, you can't be a set of islands. You actually have to think about how you can bring your collective capabilities together to kind of attack some of the big problems in the world and contribute to these big challenges. And there have been funding programs more recently that have actually tried to incentivize that collaboration across institutions. So we've kind of evolved from really good research at a researcher level to really building up those capabilities in our institutions to the point where you have world-class institutions. And then can we actually get those institutions to work together effectively to be greater than the sum of their parts? And the funding has kind of tracked in that way, and the way that institutions are working has evolved in that way. So there's been kind of a virtuous cycle in terms of how that's happened.
Thank you for that. Ms. Quinn, maybe you can sort of share with us how many scholarships have you given out annually, and has it been increasing? And are more students taking, give us a sense of what we're talking about. How many you've been doing and how the progression has been?
So for the NRC, we're not a granting agency. That's not our role. But we do take very seriously our role in using our expertise in our facilities to be able to provide excellent training opportunities for students. So back in 2017, there was a new postdoctoral fellowship program introduced within the NRC itself. Since that time, we've ramped up to funding about, in 2021-22, it was 31 postdoctoral fellows. So we went from sort of 0 to 31. And what we've seen is that it's very good for the fellows. It's equally good for the NRC. It brings new ideas. It brings sort of cross-pollination of ideas from the universities into the federal laboratories. And it does sort of provide us with opportunities to be able to also create other linkages back to those academic institutions to try to find, as Dr. Vats was mentioning, these opportunities to create synergies between our network of 9,000 small and medium-sized businesses and academics and federal researchers who can all work together to kind of get to that next level of taking technology out of the lab and into the business world.
About 30 seconds.
So we're talking about government support. Can you guys share with us the private sector's engagement in some of these endeavors and how students are being serviced that way? I'm not sure, Mr. Martin, we haven't heard from you. Do you have an answer for that one? Or is Dr. Martin? I apologize, I'm not sure.
About 10 seconds.
That's okay. So I don't have a direct answer, but as Shannon was just mentioning, we do have the IRAP, the YES program, which is a way of connecting students to industry.
Great, thank you. Et maintenant, nous avons Monsieur Blanchet.
Mr. Blanchet-Joquin, 6 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to the witnesses who are here today. Mr. Chair, it's always really hard to believe when Canadian government members say that Canada is a leader. I'm going to tell you the truth. Canada is the only G7 country that lost researchers since 2016. So that's not a world leader. Canada, Mr. Chair, I'm going to tell you. Canada is the 26th out of 38 countries of the OECD countries for the higher education graduation rate. Is that a world leader, Mr. Chair? No, that's not the reality, and it's not the truth. And I could go on with data that demonstrates that Canada has a lot of potential but is lagging behind. And we have to recognize the reality of the situation, and especially we have to tell people the truth. So, Mr. Chair, my questions will be to Mr. Vatz to begin. It's a pleasure for me to have you here, Mr. Vatz. Canada is the only G7 country that lost researchers since 2016, and you know Canada did not increase or index its graduate studies grants for the past 20 years. Did you study the causes of this brain drain? Are there reports that were produced? What can you tell us with regards to this? Thank you for the question. I would say that it's obvious that federal government bursaries have not gone up in 20 years. We know that. When I was a student in the 1990s, I'm going to come back. Did your organization study this? Did you publish any reports on this with regards to the bursary amounts or with regards to our placement? I'll repeat the question then. The question is on the brain drain. The only G7 country that lost researchers since 2016 that did not index bursaries in the past 20 years. These are two subjects. Did your organization look at this issue? Are there reports, studies, data, anything that you can share with us? The first part with regards to bursaries, the data is there, and I don't think it's necessary to have a study to demonstrate that the amounts have not increased. So it's not really necessary to publish a report. We do have the data on this, and we have the figures. So it's clear. Now, with regards to the brain drain, perhaps I didn't read the same reports as you. I know that it's a fear for the research community in Canada, but I also can say that everything I've heard are examples, but I don't have hard data to indicate that there is a true brain drain. Mr. Vat, I'm going to tell you the data that I have. Pre-budgetary briefs coming from the 15 largest universities in Canada, and they go through them here. So you can look at this because it's more than concerning. It's alarming. Now, you're saying that you don't need to have any studies on this. So what do you have to say, Mr. Vance, to the minister, to the Council of Ministers, when you try to advise them with regards to public policy, saying that there's been no indexing since the past 20 years? As an official, I explained to the minister, and he said himself that he's aware that there is a problem that needs to be solved. The government has not yet found a particular solution, but I would say that, as you were saying, and as I tried to indicate, the problem exists and it's there. So you're advising, but there's no political will to act. This is what we're supposed to understand? No, that's not what I said. I said that they've not yet identified a solution. This is something that is being discussed. The minister has had many discussions with members from the university community to better understand what are the needs. And Mr. Vats, how long have you been ADM? About 5 years. So you know the Naylor report? Great. When was this published? It was published in 2018, I believe. 2017, more specifically. The federal government ordered it in 2016. And so the Bouchard report was started in 2023. We're at a breaking point. So you're saying we have the data, we have the reports. You're saying that you're advising the minister. So where's the issue? What's blocking this? I don't have a good explanation for you. All I can say is that a lot of investments were made after the Naylor report in the research system with regards to bursaries and grants for researchers. Mr. Bushell's report was targeting the support system for research. A small part of the report is important and deals with amounts of funding for students, for researchers, and there are many other aspects of that report that are quite different. Mr. Vatt, sorry to interrupt you.
Questions, and we'll pick up on the next round. Mr. Cannings, for 6 minutes, please.
Well, thank you, and thank you for the witnesses to be here today. I'm going to continue with Dr. Vatz. We have a situation as you described. We know the problem. You said there hasn't been a solution put forward. Is it your job to come up with that solution as ADM?
Well, it's my job to make sure that we're providing evidence to ministers on the issues and to discuss what the options could look like. But it's up to the government to kind of think about what the best way forward is on these things.
Right. And, you and whenever I talk to the minister about this, I get a litany of all the things the investments that have been made, new funding programs for special sort of areas of research. But it seems to me that really the basic part of research, the people that do it, have been forgotten in all this, especially the grad students and postdocs. And I guess I'm just wondering, has there been a mismatch of where the government is putting its priorities? It wants to, go after some of the bright shining lights of AI and things like that, and has forgotten that basic research. And I know there was, an increase in funding in 2018 after the Naylor report, et cetera. But I'm just wondering how this can happen, that we can have scholarships that aren't increased for 20 years. It just seems that there's a bit of negligence going on there.
Thank you for that. I mean, I don't have a great answer for you on that. What I would say is that when you look at investments in research funding, those are also investments in people. So there is if you look at the percentage of graduate students that get federal scholarships and fellowships, it's important, don't get me wrong, but it is a relatively small layer of those students that are actually funded to do research in the country. The grants are another important element of that. So when you look at programs like the CFREF program, which we just discussed, if you look at the increases that came out of the Naylor report, it varies a bit by agency, and the agencies are going to be here in the next hour, so they could maybe speak to this. But a large part of those grants goes to fund trainees, and in some disciplines, it's virtually all of it is going to fund trainees. So it is fair to be looking at scholarships and fellowships piece, and I think it's a very clear measure of, what a specific amount going to a student would look like. But you also can't forget that, the lion's share of the funding that we think of as going to the scientists, the academic professors, is actually flowing to students and trainees as well.
But we have the Bouchard report, which was commissioned by your ministry. I don't know if you commissioned it or how that happens, but that has come back that knows about all these other investments and says we have to increase these scholarships and bursaries. We have to increase 10% per year for the next 5 years, the Tri-Council research funding. So where's the, There seems to be a disconnect there, and I'm just wondering, and on top of this, I hear now that instead of looking at increases, NSERC and the tri-councils have been asked to search for 3% cuts per year. Like, where are we going to cut? And so it sounds like suddenly, instead of increasing, we're going to see a decrease. So just wondering what's going on behind the scenes.
The Bouchard report is relatively recent. I would sort of start with it took a while to transfer from the Naylor report to sort of certain actions in response to Naylor. So I think it's still a little early to sort of be reading the tea leaves in terms of where this is going to go. Although again, it's entirely up to the government in terms of what the government feels they can take action on earlier. In the context of all the other things that they need to think about. In terms of the numbers that were put forward in the Bouchard report in terms of the increases, I think they're partly a reflection of what's going on the global scene, right? So I think if you look at what other countries are investing in research, those kinds of numbers that were cited in the Bouchard report are not inconsistent with what other countries are looking at. And so I think there is some concern about Canada's competitive position. And so I think that's probably where that comes from. Yeah.
Well, if I have a few more seconds left, then I just...
About a minute.
About a minute, okay. I just want to... We had one of the witnesses in a previous meeting here talked about advising departments across the country in science research. A lot of these departments are being forced to top up the scholarship amount so that the students can survive. And they're finding themselves having to spend more and more topping up these graduate student salaries. And so now they're being advised to take in less graduate students. That was the advice that was given to them by someone who's, a researcher in Canada going around with NSERC advising departments. So perhaps just comment on that. That's where this is leading us. We are going to have less and less graduate students, and they're the people that are doing the research.
Okay, we're actually out of time on that, but if there's something in writing we could get back, that would be appreciated as well. And we're going to go to our next round. Looks like we're going to have time for 2.5 minutes at the end for the Conservatives and 2.5 minutes at the end for the Liberals, so you can prepare for that. And Mr. Soroka, you have 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and to the witnesses for coming today. I appreciate that. Mr. Vats, I'll start off with you, and you point to a pretty picture, it seems like, how well our grad students are doing, but yet that's not what they're telling us, and I'm really concerned about their mental state when they're you'd mentioned that they can actually borrow even more money, so potentially they're worried about the finances, they're not making much money, plus they're going deeper in debt. What kind of quality of research do you think they're doing when their mind is on finances versus actually the research itself?
Well, I'd start by sort of saying that I think it's important to acknowledge that, the funding levels are a challenge. Like I think in my opening remarks, I did sort of highlight that it does have an impact on people's well-being, on their mental health. So I think I'm not trying to discount that at all. I think that if you look at again, this is anecdotal, but if you actually look at the students that are involved in the research community, they are still very driven to try and conduct the best research that they possibly can. And in Canada, they have a very good sort of research environment to do so. I'm sure this committee's had some opportunity to visit some of these facilities and meet with some of the students, but there is a lot, there's a lot of,
The point is it potentially going to be better? And I guess then what is your department doing to try to make sure that the government's well aware of this? You've said there's reports, but yet there's no increases definitely in the budget itself.
The report, as I said, the report came out just prior to the budget. The government has sort of indicated that it is studying the recommendations. I know that the minister has been pretty active, Mr. Champagne has been pretty active in terms of speaking with the academic community to understand the situation better. He's had a number of engagements over the last little while. So I think, again, I think there is an acknowledgement that there's an issue there, and it's just a question of what the best way to address it will be.
Hopefully in the future they'll be addressing this, is what you're saying. I'll go to Ms. Quinn then. You started with a bit about with my colleague when there's students are looking or researchers are looking for more financial gains and they start going to foreign entities such as Huawei for computer hacking, for instance. Are you concerned at all that there's national security at risk with the equipment that you're supplying to these students and researchers?
So any of the students or researchers that access our facilities, they all go through the appropriate security screening. They're all issued devices from the NRC facilities that are all have the appropriate protections and so on. So for anyone working for the NRC, they do have the appropriate cybersecurity provisions on all of their various tools that we give them, including phones and laptops.
Yeah, but we're teaching them how to hack computer systems. It's not necessarily our systems. That's what I'm talking about, national security, that in the future that can be used against us.
So one of the things that the NRC does try to do is provide opportunities, as I said earlier, for work experience for various students, which would serve as an alternative it's providing them opportunities as an alternative to looking to foreign entities for funding or work experience.
Okay, so I guess my concern is that in the future, as we keep looking for more money for research when it's not coming from the government, and they start looking at other foreign entities, and you're supplying them, like you said, cutting-edge technologies or facilities, equipment, are we just really attracting more foreign entities to come here to essentially abuse our system and our goodwill?
Well, there's no doubt that one of the things that we're looking at is how to make sure that the very good work that's done at an academic level and within our own laboratories finds its way into Canadian businesses, also for the benefit of the broader economy. So one of the things that we've put a lot of focus on in recent times is trying to create programming that will bring together students and federal researchers and businesses all together in one project so that you can see a direct pathway for these technologies that are under development to go all the way out into the business, a direct line into a Canadian business, so that it finds its way into the Canadian marketplace.
Great, thank you. We went over a little bit, but I'll watch that on the next speakers. Ms. Medlej-Diab, please. 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks to our witnesses as we continue on this study. So, Mr. Vats, I appreciate your testimony, and I'm going to agree with you on the infrastructure and the evolution of how the institutions are now working together, and appreciate the fact that we're now incentivizing those collaborations. I know from the part of the country that I come from Nova Scotia, the universities I have visited, I've seen that firsthand. We have top-notch infrastructure in my part, and also wonderful collaboration happening within the province, but also with institutions outside of the province. I also appreciate the fact that you have acknowledged, because I think we all do, that the funding levels are a challenge. And just this past weekend, it was Mother's Day, but I actually went to a barbecue where there was all kinds of postdoc and fellowship, because I come from a circle of my children where they are in that field. And the barbecue was attended by about 12 to 15 of them. And I was sort of asking them about that. I do agree with you, and I appreciate your testimony that students are very driven to conduct the best research possible, because they are extremely driven and they want to do their best. And the institutions they're working in are also, I would say, top-notch. So I agree with you. But, you know, they still have to make ends meet. And it's difficult. And I was asking them, and obviously what we're hearing here is correct. Before being on the committee and studying all of this, I had no idea on a lot of that. So I guess from your perspective, is there any international models that we can look into that you may be aware of, or the department is, for funding those students, postdoctoral fellows, people who have been in the field, you know, for X number of years? They're still really making pittance? Is that the English word for it? They're not making, you know, it's, and a lot of them, it's taken them a decade and a half, perhaps more, to get to where they are. And it's really, you know, it's really difficult and tough to bear, to be frank. And I guess the question is, what else can we be doing to help them? How can we direct the tri-councils? What else can we do, you know, to improve things for them? Is there any, you know, what are we missing? We're missing something, and I'm just looking to see, from your perspective, what else can we be doing as a country, as a government? And I do appreciate the fact that, even though I'm a mother of two of those like that, I had no idea. And so most Canadians would not know, would have no idea of the, you know, of the dollar amounts and the funding and so on. So how can we, you know, what else can we do?
You have about a minute and a half, Dr. Vatz.
Okay, thank you. So you asked about some international models. I think, you know, there are things that are a challenge in the Canadian context. As an example, in other countries, there's a much more active role for the private sector in supporting academic research, and academic research for its own sake, but also in terms of the collaborations between academia and industry. You look at a country like Germany, for example, there is a lot of that kind of collaboration that happens and investment that happens from the private sector that does certainly augment it. It's been a perpetual challenge here in Canada. We have a very different sort of industry structure, risk tolerance, size of firm that makes that challenging. But I think there is the question of whether we can actually bring the private sector more into this, both to support the research, but also for their long-term prosperity. So I think that is one element. There's also been a lot of focus thinking about early career researchers and you know, how you make that transition from being, for those who choose to stay in academia, how you make that transition from a graduate student to a faculty member. Some countries have sort of an intermediate stage in careers and have funding that's associated with that as you're making that transition. So again, there are different funding models for that. And then there's also, for those who don't stay in academia, how you kind of improve those successful transitions, because the majority of graduate students don't become academics. And so you want to make sure that they have the skills they need, in addition to the intellectual capital that they bring to, and the analytical skills, to actually be able to plug into the workforce more broadly.
Thank you. Mr. Blanchet-Choquin for 2.5 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you. Mr. Vatz, if I heard you correctly, you said that students play an essential role for the science ecosystem. They do research and innovation. You also said that you wouldn't have any final answers for us today with regards to the fact that the federal government didn't index bursaries for 20 years. So if you're not the person, the ADM for science and research, who can answer, who can give us this answer? The question as to why we haven't seen growth in bursary amounts is a historical issue that has been existing for 20 years. So perhaps we can look at decisions that have been made or not made over years. Mr. Vatz, I'm not sure if I asked the question in English, but
Si c'est pas vous qui peut répondre
if it's not you, who? Who can answer?
à la question, si ce n'est pas vous?
So the question of why, I'll answer in English if I may, sir. The question of why there hasn't been an increase for 20 years, as I said, is a question that is over a number of governments, a number of cycles. So it's a question that's amenable to study, but I don't have, a specific response because there wouldn't be a single answer to that question. The question of who actually takes the decisions on investments, it's successive governments. So over time, governments have certainly invested in the research system overall. The amounts have increased over time quite considerably. This aspect of the system has stayed stagnant, and I think there's an acknowledgement that that's the case. So.
D'accord. Monsieur Vatz,
Mr. Vance, speaking of solution, you know the Bouchard report, and it says that the committee asked the government to considerably increase funding for postdoctoral places. As I said, Canada is the only G7 country that's lost researchers since 2016. The largest funding program in the U.S. doubled its funding. I don't have to tell you how much the federal government invested in the last budget. It's zero. So I'm trying to understand from your point of view as a political advisor, what are you telling the government?
A couple things on that. I think you're referring to the CHIPS and Science Act in the U.S. So the CHIPS and Science Act, the bill passed in Congress, but the science appropriation never happened. So it is true that in the U.S. case that the science part of CHIPS and Science did commit to a very large increase in the budgets of the NSF and the but that's actually not been funded.
Okay.
There have been increases, but they haven't been funded.
Thank you. Mr. Cannings for 2.5 minutes, please.
Well, thank you. I'm going to turn to Ms. Quinn, and thank you for mentioning Donna Strickland. It's a great example of what we can do good in Canada with science, obviously. I had the pleasure of hearing Dr. Strickland speak a couple of weeks ago at the Bacon and Eggheads breakfast here in Ottawa. Unfortunately, I think I was the only MP there to hear her, but she did bring up this issue of funding graduate students and how she was supportive of their cause. It's interesting that, and she mentioned that she had a PDF grant. I didn't know it was an NRC one, but my question is about those PDF grants that you provide through NRC. What is their amount, and how does that compare with the grants that are provided through NSERC or any of the other tri-councils?
I'll give a general response while my colleague Dr. Martin looks for the numbers. When they join us, they come on force as a work opportunity. The remuneration is more so from the perspective of they're joining us in a term position on force. And I'll just turn you over to my colleague, Dr. Martin, who can speak a little bit more to some of the salary ranges that we provide.
About 45 seconds.
So we can provide you with details on the salary ranges, but we have for the postdocs, we bring them in at our assistant research officer level. So we have a scale for the people who we hire at NRC. And so one example is for 11 of our new hires, they were brought in at a salary range between $74,000 and $103,000, depending on their level of experience.
Okay, so that's well above what they would get through the tri-councils. That's all I need to know. Thanks.
Thank you. Great questions. And now for 2.5 minutes, Mr. Mazier. Oh, I'm sorry, Mr.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président. Je poursuis, Monsieur Vatz.
Thank you, Mr. Vance. I'm going to continue asking very broad questions. I would ask you to provide the number of graduate bursaries and postdoctoral funding provided since 2003. Provide this to the committee. Also, how many bursaries at the master's and doctoral level and postdoctoral Benting bursaries and the evolution of their value since 2003. If you could provide this to the committee, and that way we'll be able to understand the situation. We already have two reports, Naylor and Bouchard, that show us that we're at a breaking point. Mr. Vats, I'd like to hear you speak to this. Last April, Quebec announced the increase of the value of its bursaries at a master's and doctoral degree administered by the Fonds de Recherche du Québec, increase at the master's level of 15% and doctoral level 19%. Why is it that the government of Quebec deems it important to increase its bursaries? It's not the case for the federal government. I spoke to the Fonds de Recherche du Québec. I think they undertook a very valuable measure. And as I was saying, the government asked Mr. Bouchard to write a report. We have a report. Recommendations will be reviewed and decisions will be made on the system, on investment level in the system.
Right now.
D'accord. Je vais étendre.
Okay, I'm going to try. I need to be convinced further. What are the most important recommendations of the Bouchard report, other than increasing the bursary level? I would say that it's important to think of ways to improve coordination between research disciplines.
A much stronger coordinated presence internationally in terms of how we actually work with our partners to be able to really seize the benefits of our research ecosystem.
Monsieur Vats, rien à dire.
Mr. Vats, nothing to say on the 10% increase over the next 5 years?
I think funding in the system is important, whether the numbers that Monsieur Bouchard has put forward
Pourquoi
are...
ne pas avoir commencé avec cette recommandation si c'est si important?
So why didn't you go ahead with this recommendation if it's so important?
Mr. Lauzon, for 2.5 minutes to wind us up, please.
Merci.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First of all, I'd like to thank the witnesses. Thank you for being here. My first question for Mr. Vats. It is essential to invest each dollar in higher education to make sure that it is well managed, that it is managed judiciously and efficiently. We've heard you on this. I would like to speak not about granting organization, but rather the how. Given your key role in the elaboration of policies with regards to science and research, could you speak to us further on the efficiency on your system? How are you reviewing internal systems? You're always evolving as to how to distribute these bursaries and these grants. Could you speak to us on your improvement plan with regards to distribution of this funding? First of all, I would say that this question, or the granting agencies might be better placed to answer the question. The amounts that we already have for grants are part of the funding pool. But as for policy, on the policy side, we try to improve our ability to fund students working in interdisciplinary fields. Sometimes they fall between the cracks of different types of funding agencies. So if I can, I'm going to switch language.
I think some of the challenges there, I think that the agencies do a very good job in terms of delivering their traditional their scholarships and fellowships. you can debate the values, but I think that in terms of how they actually spend the money, they do it very efficiently. I think the challenges are around the things that don't fit nicely within one agency or another. And there are lots of research initiatives today that really cut across. And I think the agencies are working to try and figure out how to make those connections more effective across agencies. And it's a little bit about what's in the Bouchard report as well, is how you actually deal with those more effectively. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Thank you to the witnesses for great testimony and the members for great questions. We'll suspend for a minute or two while we set up our next panel. second round. Welcome back, and welcome to those that have just joined us. We're hoping to have Mr. Strong join us from CIHR. That wasn't the security alert we just got, but if he can hear us, maybe he can join us. Pursuant to Standing Order 108.3.1 and the motion adopted by the committee on Tuesday, February 14th, 2023, the committee resumes its study on the Government of Canada's graduate scholarship and postdoctoral fellowship programs. It's now my pleasure to welcome CIHR, Canadian Institutes of Health Research, and so far we have Christian Baron, the Vice President of Research by video conference. We have from Natural Sciences and Engineering Research Council, Alejandro Adam, the President, Manel Babushi, Vice President, Research Partnerships, Marc Fortin, Vice President, Research Grants and Scholarships Directorate. And from across the ocean, we have joining us from the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council, Ted Hewitt, President. And we also have Sylvie Lemeroux, Vice President, Research, and Valerie Latraverse, Vice President, Corporate Affairs via video conference. Thank you to all for coming, and just a reminder for those on Zoom to mute yourselves unless you're addressing us, and when you address us, address through the chair. Thank you to our translators. We did have an issue in the House yesterday when a microphone was too close to a headset was too close to the microphone, so we had terrible feedback. So please, some courtesy to and safety for our translators to keep devices separate and keep the microphone well paced away from you. So for now, we'll start with the 5-minute opening comments. We'll start with Alejandro Adam from NSERC, please.
Thank you very much. Bonjour, Monsieur le Président.
Hello, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. I'm Alejandro Adam. I would like to thank you to give me the opportunity to appear before you for a third time to discuss this critical issue.
Partnerships, and Marc Fortin, Vice President of Research Grants and Scholarships. As you know from your recent study, talent underpins the health, well-being, and economic success of our country. The pool of talent supported by NSERC and the other granting agencies plays a critical role in powering research, innovation, and economic development in Canada. NSERC directly supports around 7,000 students and postdoctoral fellows through scholarships and fellowship awards. And we indirectly support tens of thousands more through grants to researchers who use those grants to provide trainee stipends. This indirect support for talent is a component of all our programs, including partnered research and research taking place in colleges and communities across the country, and accounts for over $400 million per year. It
is important to note that the value of scholarships and fellowships offered by the granting agencies helps dictate research stipends and other types of compensation for trainees and fellows across the country. It is also a fact that the value of these awards has not changed substantially in a generation. For example, NSERC's doctoral award has remained almost constant at $21,000 per year since 2004. Considering inflation, the effective award value has dropped by 42% in this period. This poses a real challenge to students when it comes to covering their basic costs of living. We know that disadvantaged students are more likely to accumulate debt during their undergraduate degree and may find it challenging to continue on to master's and PhD level programs if financial supports are not considered viable. We also know that we are losing top talent to other countries that are able to offer significantly higher award values.
It's the balance between the numbers of student awards it offers and the monetary value of these awards. Recent investments by the Government of Canada have enabled the granting agencies to increase the overall number of students that they support through scholarship and fellowship awards. In 2019, 600 new Canada graduate scholarships were funded across the tri-agencies. The tri-agencies are rolling out funding from Budget 2022 to support over 450 Black trainees from undergraduate awards through to postdoctoral fellowships. NSERC also recently increased award values for the Undergraduate Student Research Awards program from $4,500 to $6,000. And to help provide greater stability for PhD students, NSERC, SSHRC, and CIHR have increased the duration of their doctoral scholarships from 2 or 3 years for certain awardees to 3 years for all. Looking ahead, under the direction of the Canada Research Coordinating Committee, NSERC is leading the development of a tri-agency talent strategy, and a large-scale evaluation of our talent programming will be publicly released this fall. The granting agencies are actively working together to ensure that our talent programming is responsive to the needs of today and tomorrow, preparing trainees with the skills that will be needed in the workforce of the future and positioning Canada as an internationally competitive country. As such, we are exploring opportunities to modernize and streamline our talent programs and to make it easier for applicants to apply and ensure programs continue to meet their objectives while also meeting the needs of each agency's distinct research communities. Les talents soutenus par le SRSR.
The talent supported by NSERC and the other granting agencies is the bedrock of Canada's research and innovation ecosystem and needs to be adequately supported if we are to prepare our workforce of tomorrow with the skills that will help Canada remain internationally competitive. Thank you for the chance to share my thoughts with you today. I would be pleased to answer any questions you might have.
And next we'll have up Mr. Hewitt from SSHRC. Welcome to the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and committee members, for the invitation to speak again before the Standing Committee, along with my colleagues, Madame Lamoureux and Madame Latraverse. Je suis très heureux de me présenter devant vous.
I'm very pleased to be here with you today as chair of SSHRC. We are a federal organization, federal funding organization supporting research and training in the field of human resources at the post-secondary level. Our organization is also responsible for administering many prestigious national inter-organizational programs for research funding, such as the Research Chair Program of Canada and the Excellence Research Chairs of Canada. Finally, it houses the Secretariat of the Coordination Council of Canada, CCRC, and I'm very proud to be presiding this council. As for programs and training initiatives in research and development of talent, SSHRC encourages the training of talented and creative people in the field of different fields of social sciences, history, geography, international relations, business, and economics. These are people that will become leaders on the campuses and in their communities and will contribute to the success of Canada in this 21st century characterized by globalization.
SSHRC supported more than 4,900 graduate students at master's and PhD level and postdoctoral fellows directly through scholarships and fellowships, representing an investment of about $124 million. SSHRC also supported over 4,200 students and fellows indirectly through grants that were awarded to researchers at post-secondary institutions across Canada, which accounted for an additional $72 million in support. SSHRC, as NSERC and the other agencies, is attentive to the growing calls for increased investment in research scholarships and fellowships. And the fact is, as you know well, that despite being a core component of the Canadian funding landscape, award amounts have been largely stagnant for nearly 20 years and have not kept pace with inflation. The stagnating value of awards is definitely putting a burden on research trainees and fellows, making it more challenging for them to focus on their research and to develop their skills. And in fact, students in the social sciences and humanities in particular face added constraints in seeking indirect sources of research funding, such as through grants, as compared to their peers in the natural sciences and health disciplines, which tend to be much better funded. That being said, given the funds available for this purpose within our system, there has always been a tension between raising the value of awards versus increasing their number, which we have effectively done over the last 2 decades. It's also worth noting that the federal government is not the sole source of funding for graduate students, nor does funding from this source account for the majority of support provided to students. Provinces and universities themselves are extremely important partners in this process as well. And perhaps now is the time to address both of these realities, as we can all agree that supporting the next generation of researchers in Canada from across all disciplines has never been more critical. It is key to sustaining Canada's leadership and strength in research and to helping us respond to global threats and seize opportunities that will create a better future for all of us. La façon d'y parvenir.
The way to get there is a question that has to be studied collectively within and without funding organizations. That is why I'm very pleased to participate in today's discussion on the way that we can collaborate to better support Canada's graduate scholarship and postdoctoral fellowship programs. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'm getting a note that translation online from French to English isn't working. Could we double check that that's still okay before?
Testing 1 2. This is the English interpreter. Testing 1 2 3. Testing 1 2 3. English interpretation. Testing 1 2 3.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, translators, for doing that, and thank you for the check. And now we'll go to Dr. Strong from the Canadian Institutes of Health Research for 5 minutes. Welcome to the committee.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I would like to thank the committee for the invitation to appear before you today. I consider it a privilege, both as CIHR's president and as a scientist, to address this committee. More so, as this committee has drawn attention in your first 2 reports to the issue of underfunding of graduate students in Canada, and in particular to the fact that we have graduate students and postdoctoral fellows in Canada living below the poverty level. Many often hold down multiple jobs in order to attain their graduate degrees and the experience necessary to join the workforce, whether that be in academia or in the private sector. As the president of CIHR, I have the unique opportunity to meet with graduate students across this country as I regularly visit university campuses. Uniformly, graduate students and postdoctoral fellows clearly express their dedication to research and making lasting impacts to the health of Canadians. But I've also heard their concerns that the failure of support at this most crucial moment in time as they embark on meaningful and engaging research careers sends a strong signal of what the future may hold. When I speak with their supervisors, many of whom, like me, have had rich and rewarding careers as Canadian researchers, they speak openly of the difficulties in recruiting Canadian students into the pathway of a researcher, and why many are beginning to consider training outside of Canada. As the Government of Canada's Health Research Funding Agency, our mandate is to support peer-reviewed research of the highest caliber. We have a bold 10-year strategic plan that speaks to attaining the best health for all, powered by outstanding research. A vision that is dependent on talented research teams based at universities, hospitals, and other research and community organizations in all corners of this country. In this plan, we make the commitment that we will foster both health research capacity in Canada and sustainable careers for individual researchers. And we are clear that this commitment to career sustainability includes our training programs. The vast majority of CIHR's budget is devoted to funding research through peer-reviewed research grants on a topic selected by the individuals or teams of researchers in support of a strategic research directions deemed critical by the Government of Canada. This direct research investment has resulted in some of Canada's and the world's greatest scientific achievements. We need only to look at the discovery of lipid nanoparticles in the last 20 years ago by a Canadian, Peter Koulis, to understand how important our contributions continue to be, or to the discovery of novel methods of CAR T cells that will save the Canadian health system literally tens of millions of dollars while making available this crucial cancer therapy across all corners of the country. The Canadian research ecosystem is rife with such examples. But these same funds are also the main source of financial support for master's and doctoral scholarships and postdoctoral fellowships, in that these trainees are paid directly through the grants of their supervisors. In fact, we estimate that $129 million in support was invested through stipends to graduate students and postdoctoral fellows paid through operating grants this last fiscal year alone. Along with our sister agencies, CIHR participates in the Canada Graduate Scholarship Program at both the doctoral and master's program level, investing over $192 million over the last 5 years. We also see it as a critical step in our support of development of the next generation of researchers to provide fellowship programs that provide support for highly qualified applicants in all areas of health research at the post-PhD or post-health professional degree level. These fellowships support the development of their leadership potential and position them for success as researchers of tomorrow in a very tangible way. In the last 5 years, CIHR has invested over $121 million in postgraduate fellowships. So by way of example, in early 2021, in the midst of the pandemic, CIHR launched the Health Research Training Platform pilot funding opportunity with over $28 million in funding. In addition to providing financial support for trainees, these 12 platforms funded by this program provide the necessary support for experiences and skills needed to lead to high-impact, interdisciplinary health research careers in a rapidly evolving research landscape. It provides access to interdisciplinary, interjurisdictional, and intersectorial training environments so that Canada's next research can benefit from high-caliber mentors. More recently, we invested $4 million in the Innovative Health System Impact Program that provides highly qualified PhD candidates, postdoctoral researchers, and early career researchers opportunities for health research. In all of these programs, we focus on strengthening research talent pipeline in accordance with principles of equity, diversity, inclusion, and anti-racism. Our goal is to remove systemic barriers to accessing research training funding and embrace these diverse initiatives. For example, we're currently piloting an initiative that we are exceptionally proud of called the CIHR Research Excellence, Diversity, and Independence Early Career Transition Award, otherwise known as READY. This groundbreaking award is an early career transition award for Black and marginalized female scholars that provides significant research support in their training program and in partnership with universities, funding in the early parts of their research career.
Okay, I think we'll have to cut off there. Maybe you can get the rest of your testimony as part of your answers, Dr. Strong. Thank you. And we'll start off with our 6-minute rounds. We're going to be very tight on time. So watching it closely, starting off with Mr. Lobb.
Thanks very much, Chair. First question is for Mr. Adam, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. Is there a role for businesses to pay more into the topic we're discussing today?
Well, thank you very much for the question. Absolutely, encouraging businesses and the private sector to get into R&D in Canada, I think, is one of the priorities of the government. Previously, I was the CEO of MyTex, and there's a partnership program for internships in industry for graduate students. And we have a program called Alliance that builds academic partnerships between academic partners and industry. And the students work on problems from the real world, from the industrial sector or not-for-profits, and there is cash on the table that they provide. So the more we can do of that, I think, the better.
So the topic we're discussing today, when you provide grants to these opportunities that we're discussing today, is there any business dollars coming in to match up with these dollars?
Through our Alliance program, it's research partnerships. Indeed, there's money, a partnership between what we provide and a matching amount that is provided. And this provides opportunities for the students and the researchers to work on the particular strategic projects which will be of benefit to the company and to Canada.
Okay. Sorry, is it Mr. Hewitt and Mr. Adam? I just wondered, is there a list of all the projects, of all the different disciplines that are allocated? Is there a list that we could have on this study that says, okay, there was these many studies or these many dollars given out to these students, and here's what they studied? Is there a list somewhere that this committee could look at to have some basis of this?
Dashboards for our Alliance program. Maybe I'll pass it over to our Vice President for Research Partnerships.
Hello, I'm Minal Bahabashi. So with respect to your question, we do have information on the grants that we've provided, and we also have a database that provides the awards, the award amounts, etc. So we are able to furnish information if we...
And right into the granular detail as to the topic in which they're working on?
The title of the project, yes.
Okay, that's good. That's good. And I would imagine 99.9% of the topics studied are important. But I noticed, I think it was a Kitchener Record posted this thing, and I couldn't believe it, that there was a research project done studying Dolly Parton's lyrics. And I'm pretty sure there was some federal dollars that were involved. So does anybody, like, I don't suppose NSERC's funding any projects like that, but how do we assure the taxpayers that there's no tri-council granting dollars going to study what Dolly Parton wrote about? Ted, would you want to comment on that at all? Like, give us some context here that we don't have any types of things like this.
I can't comment on that particular project. I know we're certainly able to provide you and members and anyone, and I do this quite often for MPs, as many of the members will know, provide lists and topics of things that are being researched. I can tell you that whatever is being proposed is subject to expert or what we call merit review. So under the criteria of the program, they're assessed in this way and funded on the basis of excellence. And I would say sometimes it's important to look beyond the titles, to see exactly what people are doing and what the impact and benefit to Canada would be.
Sure. No, I can't complain with that. Do you think as well, sorry, Mr. Dem, you're the guy in person here today, so you're kind of on the hot seat here. Some of the universities, not all, but some of the universities in this country, I would say are very, I don't know if wealthy is the right word to say, but they have billion-dollar endowment funds. They have big salaries. I'm not saying with their professors, but certainly big salaries in the administration. Do you think before we go much further, we need to really look at, I don't want to put you on the spot here because probably some of these guys are your colleagues, but do we need to look at this and say, look, you're coming to us for money, more money, but look on the other side. You got almost $3.5 billion in your endowment fund here. What are we doing? Do we need to have a discussion as a country on this?
Well, I think the ecosystem, the university ecosystem, should have discussions about that because the support for graduate students is a combined approach. As my colleague Ted Hewitt mentioned before, rarely is a student just supported by Tri-Council. There'll be teaching assistantships and funds from provincial and private donors. So what is the acceptable minimum wage for a graduate student at a university, at a big city? That's something which I think universities should address. There's also the element of tuition and how that factors in. So I think...
Thank you. And one last statement I'd like to... I'm probably run... 40 seconds is plenty of time. It must be because I know all of you folks here are very intelligent. You probably get more brains in your little finger than I have in my head. But I would imagine it must be frustrating at some level to see all the money spent, I want to call it, on some of these pork barrel projects through the years that government comes up with. And we have this issue with these hardworking, intelligent people can't get a fair shake at a dollar. And all they would have had to do is redirect that waste that we can't show for anyways to you folks and what you're trying to do for these students. Do you have any thoughts on that? I mean, I don't want to give you a career.
We have run out of time, Mr. Lobb.
But
I'll have to cut you off there, but you've given us some food for thought. I'll go over to Ms. Medledge-Diab for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And I want to start off by thanking all the witnesses that are here today from the three councils. You have been here before, and I'm sure you will be here again. And I tell you, I agree with my colleague there, Mr. Lobb, that the talent and expertise and education that you all have, I have no doubt, way outweighs most of the MPs. I'll say most because I don't know all the MPs or government or anything. So thank you so much for being here and giving us your time, your experience, your knowledge to really sort of delve into this particular topic that obviously hasn't been really looked at in this way in the last 20 years. So I'm glad we're here. I'm going to start off with two questions. And Mr. Hewitt, I'll start with you because you actually brought them out, but I would like to, for whatever time I have remaining, to have all three, if possible, deal with them. And if you can't now, perhaps submit it in writing. And I'm going to say the two questions, and then I'm going to leave it open for you to talk about. last week we heard about from other witnesses about raising the value of awards versus the number of awards. So student increasing the, we're calling them students, but some of these people are not students. These are postdoctoral. These are like geniuses as far as I'm concerned. I guess, so that's one question that I have. What do we do? And quite frankly, who decides on these things? It can't be government, I don't think. But who decides and how do we deal with that? I'll start with that, but then the second one, if we have time, and if we don't, I'd like to get something in writing, and that was alluded to a few times. What is the balance here? And I can imagine each of the three councils are different, between federal sources of funding, provincial, private. How do we deal with that? How do we assess it? What kind of a balance? Because it's not just the federal government here that surely is responsible. So, Mr. Hewitt, Dr. Hewitt, please go ahead.
Yes, thank you for your question. So to answer the first question with regards to the value, the Canada graduate scholarships, and I believe there are about 3,000 master's scholarships and about 1,000 doctoral fellowships. Those values were, in accordance with my understanding, set when the program was established and incorporated into the budget. So we don't have the ability to increase or decrease those amounts and affect the number. For the graduate scholarships and postdoctoral fellowships that our agency funds, and I believe the same for CIHR or for NSERC, and they can speak for their agency, we fund several hundred of those, 600, 700, 500 to 700 each year. We determine the value of those and the values largely remain the same because of the conversations that we've had periodically about whether we want to increase the value or whether we want to maintain the number. And frankly, I can tell you that in the past we've said, we really want to get to as many students as we can. Right now, let's just push the number and we'll have to find a way to increase the amounts. Partly we take that approach because we realize, as my colleagues have said, that this is not the only source of funding available to students. There are provincial bursaries as well. There is money from donations, and there is the ability to work as a TA or other types of activities. Sometimes universities can support students that we fund in that way. Sometimes when we support them, they decide not to allow them access to those funds and to spread money around still further to fund more students. So and I think that's why, and Dr. Adam had suggested earlier, this is a system-wide issue that we need to resolve. We need to set the reference rate of pay. I totally agree with this, and I totally agree that we need to look seriously at increasing those rates. Maybe I'll allow my colleagues to take on the other questions.
Yeah, we have less than a minute for each of the colleagues if you're going to be splitting.
Please go ahead.
So I'm very happy to respond to that, and thank you, Mr. Chair, for the question. Very quickly on that, I would agree with everything that my colleague, Dr. Hewitt, has expressed in there. It is a system-wide issue. I think we do need to set what will be obviously a floor for all of these. And recognize that there will be some variability that will occur geographically. That was already alluded to earlier in one of the questions, but also by the nature of the trainee themselves. We do look after a lot of fellowship training program of individuals with advanced degrees and are coming as health professionals. So there's a bit of a difference there in what the funding will look like. And that does really control the numbers. At the end of the day, there's only so many dollars. So for us, it is that balance that Ted was talking about. But I absolutely agree. We need to grapple with this and get a floor set as to what's appropriate.
About 45 seconds.
Well, I just want to mention that we also support programs at the colleges and polytechnics. And in this year's budget, there was $108 million for that sector. And a lot of students benefit from hands-on work experience and academic training. So that's a very important sector to also keep an eye on.
All right, well, listen, thank you very much with my few seconds left. If there's anything that we missed after this that you think would help us in this study, please, by all means, please share with us.
Great, thank you. And if there's 10 seconds, I'm interested in the governance and how you work amongst yourselves. That was mentioned in the Bouchard report, and maybe if you can comment back on how you govern yourselves between the agencies would also be something we could receive in writing. Mr. Blanchet-Jolcasse, for 6 minutes.
Thank you to the witnesses for being here. My first question from Mr. Adem. You said that you increased the scholarships from 2 to 3 years. The question that we should ask ourselves is, did the increase of the number of scholarships follow the number of student increase in Canada? And how can this be compared to the number of requests? Do you have data on the percentage of approvals of fellowships and scholarships? I'll give the floor to my colleague. Thank you for the question. There are two programs. There's one for the master's study, another one for doctoral studies. The master's study one is administered by universities, so we don't have the data on the amount of requests or what is the success rate. That's at the master's level. At the doctoral level, we do have data, and it will be our pleasure to send it to you on the number of requests, the number of scholarships. Number of scholarships has remained consistent. Rather, there was an increase in 2019, as was mentioned. Thank you. So, Mr. Adem, if I continue, I understand that you don't have all of the data, but we also note that now the duration of studies is over 3 years at a master's or doctoral level. Have you thought about this? Have you thought of increasing the duration of these scholarships? That's a great question. It's a bit of a paradox. We have to think about this further. When we set out a strategy on talent and scholarships, we have to think of these things. It is important. Thank you. I'm going to ask my questions now to Mr. Strong. Mr. Strong, you spoke of the importance of having better health. Yes, of course, Canadian Institutes of Health Research does research on health. I'd like to talk about students' health. They have the same budget as students who were in their place in 2000. A grocery basket that was worth $100 a few years ago is now $153. And there's increase in rent and gas and everything. The Union des étudiants du Québec showed that 58% of the student population in Quebec has psychological distress, a high level of psychological distress. That's 2 out of 3 students. In the general population, it's 1 out of 5. So we really see here the severe consequences because people are living in a financially precarious situation. Do you think that having scholarships that push students into financial precarity is a way to help them and support them to do more research?
Well, thank you very much, and thank you, Chair, for the question and for the member for that. Clearly my answer to that would be that, we have to have the concern with regards to the health of our students as a paramount objective. A graduate degree, whether it be at a PhD or a master's, is in and of itself a stressful period of time. It is doing research and working under very difficult conditions sometimes in terms of making sure that their experiments are done. And so everything that we can do to ensure that the rest of their lives and the rest of their well-being is looked after, I think is our priority. It is part of our responsibility. I, as a lab supervisor, I have students in my lab right now where I have concerns for that. So you're right. The financial stability is important, the ability to go home. Many have children, many have families, to ensure that they are stable. So I agree with your comment. It's an important feature for us to be cognizant of.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you. Mr. Adem, I know that you are supporting inclusion and diversity. The 3 federal funding agencies have no seat for the students, and the Fonds de Recherche du Québec, they do this. There are seats on boards in Quebec for the student population so that they can express their point of view. Students are part of the process. So I'd like to know why your organization doesn't look at what's happening in Quebec and doesn't give a seat on its board to a student. Thank you for the question.
The committees of our council, governing council, do have students on them, the Committee of Discovery Research. for the senior committee, the governance council, these are GIC appointments, and students are possible, I am told, but they are not. We have not received them, so we welcome them. We had a conversation with the associations of students, and they asked us if we would welcome their participation, and we, of course, said yes, and very important for us. And I also want to mention that there is an ongoing study on talent and all the different streams of funding that is being coordinated by the Canada Research Coordinating Committee, and my colleague Mark Fortin is spearheading many of those efforts. And out of I think 18 people, 7 or so are students. So absolutely, and if I may say so, one of the reasons the stipends have not been increased is because the advocacy of the students is not incorporated into the governance of the councils.
Monsieur Adam, en tant que...
Mr. Adam, as president of NSERC, do you agree that students should have a greater place at your board? Yes. Thank you.
Mr. Cannings, for 6 minutes, please.
Well, thank you to the witnesses for being here, and it's been very interesting. I'm just going to start again with Dr. Adem, because you're here in person. And also we had a chance to have a conversation yesterday about this. I'm curious about the budgetary process. Budgets are kind of a mystery to me in some ways. And so where are the decisions being made about these scholarship and grants amount? They seem to be the same across the tri-councils, so I'm assuming it's above there somewhere. Where would that decision be made as to we should increase these amounts?
Well, what we do is we provide information and about what the current amounts are, what the pressures are, and international comparators. And upon request from the ministry and others, we dive into crunching the numbers and the modeling as to how much money would be necessary, say, to increase a particular scholarship to a certain level. So that's the kind of process, and it's a very iterative process. And at some point, Ministry of Finance gets involved in trying to understand what the size of the ask would be to do that.
So to make it clear then, you've been pointing this out to the government, I don't know how often, on an annual basis or whatever, and they have decided not to do that? Is that what I'm hearing?
Well, we are part of government, so we don't advocate for funding, but we explain to our colleagues what the situation is and what the international comparators are. For example, the National Science Foundation in the U.S., their graduate scholarship is $37,000 U.S. plus $12,000 for research expenses. That's kind of like the main comparator for us.
And I get the impression that while you're providing this information to the government to make the decision, you're also hearing requests from the government to think about getting less in coming years, to go through exercises for budget cuts. Is that...
Perhaps you're referring to what was announced, I believe, in the budget decision. There's going to be a cut across government, and we're part of that exercise, as is every department in government.
Okay, I will turn to Dr. Hewitt, I guess. We've been hearing that, of course, you were mentioning that these aren't the only sources of income for many graduate students, that, some have opportunities for teaching assistantships. There are top-ups that departments provide. It's also generally known that the government supports for universities, the share of income for universities that come from the government has been steadily declining for 30 years or so. So universities are having a tough time. We heard from one of our witnesses the other day that she's been advising universities and university departments to cut down on the number of grad students because they're having trouble providing these funds for the top-ups that are necessary for students to basically find a place to live and feed themselves and their families. So I'm just, again, wondering, isn't there that real pressure to increase these scholarships and fellowships, especially if they are considered the standard then for other programs?
Yeah, thanks for that question, and I absolutely agree. But the reality is, I think as the committee's aware that we're funding a minority of students. In fact, not a large minority of students. So in effect, we can increase the rates, and we've been certainly saying that. This serves as a reference rate that can be used for students who are paid through other means, such as grants, but also perhaps as a signal to provinces as well that they need to contribute more. But that breakdown, maybe I would say, I don't know whether you have plans to invite representatives of the universities to speak to about how they fund graduate students. But I think, they might be in a better position to answer that, as we know that provincial rates of support for universities has been falling and reliance on tuition has been increasing. And that tuition is also coming from graduate students, which eats into the support that we provide them at the federal level. So if we don't think about solutions that incorporate all the players and all the partners, we're not gonna solve the problem in a satisfactory way.
Thank you. I'm going to turn to Dr. Strong and ask more or less the same question, and I also want to thank you for mentioning my friend Peter Cullis. I think perhaps people around this table are getting bored of me bringing up his name in that example so often, but again, we've been hearing how the number of scholarships has been increased to help more students, but that in itself doesn't help them. They still have to find extra funding to live, basically, to provide these top-ups. And and I know you've answered this in some ways before, but just to reiterate the fact that increasing these scholarship and fellowship amounts to reflect what's been happening with inflation over the last 20 years would have a very valuable impact on the lives of these students.
Very briefly.
It would have an immediate and tangible impact.
Great. Thank you very much. And now we'll go to our next round. We've got 15 minutes carved out, which will take us a little bit past the top of the hour, so we're just getting permission to be able to offer that. Mr. Mazier for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. At this committee, students have shared the hardship they are facing because of the Liberal government's cost of living crisis. Witnesses have repeatedly called on the current government to support graduate students and postdoctoral fellows. Their requests have been ignored, but they are still looking for answers. My first question is for NSERC. In your June 30th, 2022 quarterly financial report, it states, and I quote, "The authority of Parliament is required before the Government of Canada can spend money. Approvals are given in the form of annual approved limits through appropriation acts or through legislation in the form of statutory spending authorities for specific purposes." End quote. Does parliamentary authority limit your ability as a body to reallocate funds in your own budget to increase the value of scholarship and fellowships?
So we can do this, but under sort of limited circumstances, and it depends on the particular program. Some of them are ring-fenced. But the situation for us is that 33,000 graduate students are supported by the grants. So that's the indirect support. And certainly all the international students that we bring in. And the rest are a small number which are supported directly by the scholarships. And the question is, are you going to reduce the number which are supported, or you hope for an increase, which is what the community tends to communicate to us. And I should also say that because we cooperate so closely with the other agencies, we don't do a sort of unilateral actions without doing it in concert with the whole sector.
Okay. Can you provide a list of which ones are ring-fenced? I guess that's the term of basically you are limited, would be layman's terms?
Absolutely, we can provide that information.
And why ring-fenced? Why?
Maybe I'll pass it on to my colleague who's more knowledgeable about such.
Those are decisions or initiatives that are announced by government in various budgets over the years. Yes, so the government will make an investment, for example, in black scholars, better supporting black scholars, as was announced last year.
Or increasing wages in general.
That could be.
Okay, that's good. I got another question here. My second question is the Canadian Institute for Health Research. In 2021-22, your organization had a budget of $815.5 million in discretionary funds giving your organization the financial flexibility to support a variety of programs. Is there anything preventing you from using these funds to increase financial support to graduate or postdoctoral students?
So thank you very much for the question. I'll need to get back to you with written response as to how those dollars are actually allocated. Many of them are already attributed specifically to programs which I would not be able to access. The exact amount, though, we will follow up directly with you with that response.
But I guess you're a supervisor, you suggested earlier. So is there anything limiting you from actually paying your when you set up your budgets, can you just allocate more to the student at the end of the day?
So the answer to that is yes. There is nothing that would preclude me from doing that as a supervisor. The issue is, at the end of the day, for the vast majority of funding for CIHR investigators, your fixed amount of funding that you have, if you increase to the students, there is less towards the research that needs to be done in the lab as well. So it's a very precarious balance, but direct answer to your question, and there's nothing that would preclude that.
Sir, I guess I'm sort of following up with Mr. Lobbs and Mr. Canning's. It's still like $850 million is a lot of money. It's a lot of money floating around in the system. That how much is actually allocated for students versus in the big scheme of things, right? Like maybe we need one less pipette, I don't know, or 10 less. But I mean, that's the kind of questions I can't get over that just aren't being asked as themselves as you set up these budgets. And my third question is for INSERC. In 2021, the government put in place stricter guidelines to require national security reviews for academics seeking federal funding from your organization. Can you provide in writing to this committee how many applications have been denied under these new guidelines and the reason they were denied?
Absolutely, we can provide that information. Yes.
Thank you very much. That's all I have, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Mazier. And now to Ms. Bradford, please, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to our witnesses for returning to our committee again today. So we really do appreciate your input. President Hewitt, you mentioned that, of course, the federal funding is just one means, a source of funding for these students, and obviously it hasn't been increased since 2003. Could you just address, and I think you've already alluded that perhaps the provincial funding has gone down and decreased. So you said that the other pockets of funding are provincial funding and post-secondary institutions. Can you just tell us about the trends on those two pockets of funding, how they've increased, maintained, decreased over the years?
I would certainly have to defer to my colleagues to put together some data for you, but I know just in terms of the process, quite often in universities, and again, it may be a question for university association reps to answer, but internal policies, in effect, prevent students from holding, say, a federal scholarship or bursary, and also other funding made available by the university. There's also, in the case of Ontario, for example, it's long been the case that if you hold, for example, a Shirk doctoral fellowship, you cannot hold an Ontario graduate scholarship. And the purpose of this is not to avoid stacking so much, but to ensure money can be spread around as much as possible to support more students, as opposed to raising the amounts that are available to individual students. And we totally understand why that's the case, but that doesn't make it okay. We have to figure out a way, and we've all said this, to raise rates that individual students are receiving within the context of that system, or to allow them certainly to have access to increased funds in order to live properly, in effect.
Understood. No, also we know that many other countries, the private sector is much more engaged in funding research. So I was wondering if you could, make some suggestions as what the federal government can do to encourage the private sector to get more involved in this. Like, could there be matching funding, or what would you suggest so that we can encourage our risk-averse private sector to step up because they can benefit from this?
Excuse me, is that question for me?
Yes, and then I also want to hear President Adam's views on this as well.
So I think as Dr. Adem had mentioned, there are programs that do rely on contributions from private sectors, such as MyTax, and I think they work very well. Also, Canada has, I would say, a reasonable Canadian universities have had reasonable success in attracting industry to support projects on a contract basis in universities. A lot of that funding is used to support students. I'm not sure what the current value is, but back in the day when I was at Western VP Research, it was already well over $1 billion. So I'm sure it's much more than that. And I think there are other options that can be applied as well through some of our partnership programming that Dr. Adam mentioned, and that SHRC also maintains, where those contributions can help to support students. Absolutely. So I'll stop there and allow my colleagues to weigh in.
Yes, and I just want to say, I know that the colleges are very effective at having partnerships, particularly in manufacturing, things like that, because they benefit directly from the research. Dr. Adem.
Yes, absolutely. The colleges are excellent partners for industry. We have a large program called Alliance. The budget is close to $300 million per year, and it's a partnership program with industry for not-for-profits, focusing on strategic priorities for the private sector as well as for Canada and the government priorities. We're delivering on the quantum strategy, quantum science, quantum technologies. We're delivering jointly with SHRC on reducing carbon emissions in agriculture. We had one on small nuclear reactors. So a lot of partnership, and indeed everyone's goal should be to get more investment from the private sector into research, because government cannot pay for all of it. It's a mistake to think that. Thank you.
And it's the private sector that benefits from this. So also, in response to our second study that we did this committee, Top Talent Research and Innovation, we heard that through the work of the Canada Research Coordinating Committee, we're developing the tri-agency training strategy, and it aims to be trainee-centric, evidence-based, and transparent while communicating a shared vision among the tri-agencies and upholding the principles of equity, diversity, and inclusion. But also, the report of the advisory panel on the Federal Research Support System wrote that the Canada Research Coordinating Committee and other efforts haven't fully achieved harmonization, and the support system remains fragmented. So, Dr. Adem.
We've run over time. I'm sorry. I know. I'm sorry.
A question for him to maybe provide it in writing? Or no?
No, we're over time.
Okay,
Thank
all
you. We have to watch time because we are getting close. We do have some permission to go just past the top of the hour. So over to Mr. Blanchard-Cholka for 2.5 minutes.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président. Je vais poursuivre mes questions. Monsieur le Président, certains collègues tout à l'heure ont dit que le Canada est un chef de file.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Some said that Canada was a leader in research. Canada is ranking 18 among OECD in investment in research and development. Canada is the only G7 country that decreased investment in the last 20 years. The last 20 years is a good number because this government didn't increase the postgraduate subventions as well in those 20 years. So let's go back to the crux of the problem is the proportion of investment in research and the amount funded by the government and via these tri-agency. In the last years, there was a decrease. Amounts decreased in the last years. In 8 years, we decreased by 5%. My question for Mr. Adam, if the government decreases the amounts or reduces the amounts for the tri-agency, we realize that it's impossible for your agencies to give bigger funds. Inflation is the most important thing in the impact for the agencies. I'm a mathematician. I see the impact of inflation on our budgets. And we do our best with the money we have. We must compete internationally. We must do things differently. If you had a wish for your organization, what would you ask to the government? I want Canada to be a leader in all sciences. How do we achieve this? We have to invest in people, in the new generation.
Richard, for Mr. Cannings, for 2.5 minutes, please.
Well, thank you. And I'm going to turn to Dr. Strong and just ask about the comparators. Dr. Adem mentioned these, in your field. What are the comparators internationally that grad students are looking at? The funding prospects in other countries. We see that, certainly when Canadian students get their PhDs or doctorates, almost half of them are going abroad after that. And I'm just wondering, how do we look at those comparators and make investments here to keep them here in Canada?
Thank you very much for your question. That need to be addressed on that. First off, many do leave the country to get enhanced training in techniques and methodologies that would not be available here. And that's very reasonable. I think we want to see that happening. We want to make sure, however, that we can bring them back. And so we have to make sure that the early training programs have sustainability into their first return back to Canada. So I think that would be a very important one to look at. The second is that as a comparator, we do look very carefully south of the border. The National Institutes of Health would be our major comparator, but also we look in Europe. So the Wellcome Trust Foundation is a major training program. So we do look internationally to make sure that we are comparable, but the major issue for us would be to not only sustain them while they're getting that training, but create the programs that would bring them back, which then would enrich our knowledge base.
And just in terms of that comparability, how do we stack up? It sounded like we're sort of paying out maybe half of what the Americans are paying, but internationally, the Wellcome Trust, how do we stack up there?
Yeah, we are below what would be international averages that we should be looking at with regards to funding. The exact percentage, we could give you that breakdown by major comparators, but there's no place where we would be exceeding.
Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you so much to all our witnesses. It's been said, but your contribution to Canada's science can't be understated. So thank you for everything that you're doing and continue to do. We're going to be continuing this study on Thursday and in the first hour. And then in the second hour, we're going to be considering the 2 International Moonshot Programs draft report, version 2. I should say. We're providing drafting instructions for the support of IP commercialization report, and we'll be considering our first version of the research and scientific publication in French draft report. A distribution was sent asking for you to give us input on those. So we have a lot of work to do on Thursday. It sounds like we're adjourning the meeting. Okay, thank you.